Welcome back, everyone. I will cover the build, release, run section of the 12-factor app in this video. So it starts out by saying strictly separate build and run stages. Okay. A code base is transformed into a non-development deployed through three stages. So a code base, in this case, our code base is transformed into a non-development deploys to three stages. Okay. So the build stage is a transform which converts a code repo into an executable bundle known as build. So if you have let's say, a Node application or a React application, it has a build stage where it goes through and packages all the dependencies into a nice bundle. I'm talking about a front-end framework here. I'm sure it's different for different languages and different kinds of frameworks. But in a React app or let's say a Polymer app, that's what happens. The build stage will package the code that the developer has written and all its dependencies into nice bundles. That bundle is nothing but the executable. So using a version of the code at a commit specified by the deployment process, the build stage fetches vendor dependencies and compiles binaries and assets. They're saying so the deployment process can specify a version of the code, at a commit. I do not understand the convoluted sentence here, but when we're ready to build, let's say we want to build for staging, we mention in the build script, we say, hey, we want to build for staging, and it will go and get all the staging related dependencies in code, and it will build your executable or build your bundle for the staging environment. So the release stage takes the build produced by the build stage and combines it with the deploy's current config. The resulting release contains both the build and the config and is ready for immediate execution in the execution environment. Okay. So they're saying the release takes the build. So let's say a build is produced for staging. Let's say the version is called stage version. So it will take the code, it will build, it will create an executable for the staging environment. And the release stage takes these build and combines it with the deploy's current config. The resulting release contains both the build and the config and is ready for immediate execution in the execution environment. The run stage, also known as runtime, runs the app in the execution environment by launching some set of apps processes against a selected release. So at a high level, the build stage is used to create a build. Build is nothing but a bundle of executables for any specific environment. Let's call it the staging environment, and the release stage takes the build and combines it with the config, and this release stage is ready for execution in the execution environment. The run stage runs the app in the execution environment by launching some set of apps processes against a selected release. So there are three stages for a code, how a code gets transformed from how a code is transformed into a deploy. I think the code base is transformed into a deploy through 3 stages. The first one is the build stage, the second one is the release, and third one is the run stage. Okay. The 12-factor app uses strict separation between build, release, and run stages. So a 12-factor app uses strict separation between build, release, and run stages. Okay. For example, it is impossible to make changes to the code at runtime. Yeah, there should be no code changes at runtime, since there is no way to propagate those changes back to the build stage. It's saying at runtime, there should be no code changes. Obviously, I mean, so deployment tools typically offer release management tools, most notably the ability to roll back to a previous release. So deployment tools provide release management tools which help us to roll back to a previous release. For example, the Capistrano deployment tool stores releases in a subdirectory named releases, where the current release is a symlink to the current release directory. Its rollback command makes it easy to quickly roll back to a previous release. Every release should always have a unique release ID, such as a timestamp of the release or an incrementing number, such as v blah blah blah. So in our application, we use timestamp for every release. Releases are an append-only ledger, and a release cannot be mutated once it is created. Any change must create a new release. Obviously, they're saying once you make a release, you cannot make changes to the release. You cannot mutate it. If there are changes to be made to a release, basically you release a new version. Builds are initiated by the app's developers whenever new code is deployed. Okay, so whenever the developer has new code and he's trying to merge his new code, let's say for the staging environment or for a test environment, the deployment tools will create a new release and deploy it to an execution environment for the testers to test it. Runtime execution, by contrast, can happen automatically in cases such as server reboot. Or a crashed process being restarted by the process manager. Therefore, the run stage should be kept to as few moving parts as possible, since problems that prevent an app from running can cause it to break in the middle of the night when no developers are on hand. So they're saying runtime execution environments can happen automatically, especially, let's say, for whatever reason the system rebooted. The system rebooted, the runtime environment has to start automatically after the system is done rebooting. So they're also saying the run stage should be kept to as few moving parts as possible. So it should be simple to start an app. So there shouldn't be too many moving parts. You should not be doing To start an app, you should not be starting this service, that service, like 15 different services before you start your app. So it should have very few dependencies, because there are no developers who will be available in the middle of the night when the app crashes. It should be able to start gracefully by itself. The build stage can be more complex since errors are in the foreground for a developer who is driving the deploy. I was saying the build stage can be more complex. So in the build stage, actually there is a lot that happens. You take all the dependencies, the developer's code, you package everything into a build, and that will be deployed. So at that point, you can do a lot of things. You can run a bunch of tests. That's what they're saying. The build stage is pretty complex, can be more complex. So anyway, that's all I have for this build, release, and run. Let's see what's in the next section. And the next section talks about processes. I'll stop this video and start another one for processes.